So the basics of workshop instruction. I mean, this is really one of my favorite ways to teach. And there is some disagreement in the reading community as to whether the workshop method is that applicable for students who need a lot of reading intervention. Some do argue that it works well in the suburbs where kids already have reading skills, but the amount of independent reading time built into the model actually hurts students' reading abilities. Others, though, argue that the motivation and the self-selection and choice involved in readers' workshops can help empower students and have them create a love of reading, and that love of reading is just as important as those individual skills. So now when we talk about, I talked about a little bit of the gradual release of responsibility. And what does that mean? Well, this is a great chart, and it's been adapted over time. I think this version is by Duke and Pearson, but they adapted it from Pearson out and Gallagher. And the whole idea is, if this is on this column, the percent of the tasks that the teacher does, and this is the student. Well, you want to be teaching. You want to walk the line of shared responsibility, in essence. And those are the scaffolds that you provide students. And if you were to take explicit direct instruction, that's primarily the teacher doing the work, versus like problem-based self-directed learning would be the student. Readers and writers workshop should live in here. And what happens is you start up with the mini lesson with the teacher primarily in control, and you model and you provide direct instruction. Then you go into guided practice where you do it with the students, and then you hand it over to them, and they're working on it, and then finally they take over control, and hopefully they internalize those lessons. You'll hear this phrase often: I do, we do, you do. So this is the I do, this is the we do, and this is the you do. So what is the workshop routine? Basically, there's four major components in Reader's Workshop. It starts off with a mini lesson, followed by independent reading time, conferencing, journaling, and then a share time where you all get together and talk about what was going on in the class. I'm not going to skip the videos because you guys are going to be watching them throughout the class. But the mini lesson has four major components. You explicitly define what you're going to teach, you model what you're going to teach, you give the students a chance for guided practice, and then you give them an example of independent practice. So if you were going to say focus on using pictures to enhance understanding, you might explicitly define the elements of the picture, like say the title, if there's a caption, or call-out boxes. You would model as a good reader. You do a read aloud, and you'd show them how you use those pictures, and then you would give the students some guided practice. Then you'd release them to their seats, or you would give them a chance at the small group to work on it independently. To do some check-ins. So the mini lesson is really broken down into those four parts. It usually takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and it's connected to the curriculum and something that you would like to do. Skipping the videos again. So yeah, it explicitly teaches a reading skill or strategy. Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll use a below grade level text for my mini lessons, and that's because I don't want the students having to focus in on decoding or understanding the text. I want them to really see what I'm doing. When I was a sixth grade teacher, for example, I would use Shel Silverstein poems all the time for my mini lessons because they work for the students, and they could see me, if I was doing a lesson on inference, see me making the inferences without having to worry too much about the text. They often use big books in the very younger grades, and we'll talk about, and I have some examples of big books later on in this module. Here's an example of a big book. You can see that the teacher is making the connections between the titles and the illustrations. They're talking about how we label illustrations. So she's modeling a lot of the reading skills in this mini lesson. You can see the students all with her here. And you notice the students all have a book, the shared book, Underground Homes. This is very common when you're doing informational text with a big book, where the students might have a copy of the shared text for the mini lesson. Now, the independent reading time, this is a part of Reader's Workshop where students are given choice in their books. And this is where Reader's Workshop can defer and change around the level of choice. You could have students where Unfortunately, a lot of them get stuck in leveled books where it's like, oh, you've been declared a P kid, so you can only read books off of this shelf. As you know, I'm not a big proponent of sticking kids into book groups based on Lexile levels. It's just not my style. I'd rather have kids picking topics that interest them first versus worrying about if a book is too hard for their independent reading levels. Um, so the levels of choice involved in independent reading time can include, like, maybe you just are doing genres and kids can just pick a genre. They might be in the mystery group or they might be in the history group. They could just pick out their own independent book. It could be that they have to pick on level. So you do have a variety of choice with the independent reading time levels. And again, I'm going to skip the videos because you folks can watch those on your own time. Now, during conferences, and part of Reader's Workshop is having individual goals for every single student. And you want to track those as a teacher. So during the independent reading time, you're going to be doing small group or individual instruction with students around their reading goal. So if one student, for example, needs help with focusing on decoding skills, this is when you might do some of that, that practice to give them extra decoding skills practice. Or some of your other students who might excel at the reading comprehension, you might be working with them on making connections to other texts or real life connections, or comparing multiple sources. So this gives you the chance to differentiate your instruction during class. So in what's successful independent reading? For me, I like to remove the silent from SSR. I want my kids talking about the books that they're reading. And I mean, yes, they do need to read quietly, but at the same time, it needs to be more interactive. And you need to have classroom routines around what successful independent reading looks like. And what I use as my maximum is 10 minutes per grade. So, in second grade, I wouldn't give them more than 20 minutes of independent reading. Third grade, I wouldn't do more than 30. And I really don't even usually go more than 20 minutes overall, just because our instructional minutes are so precious. And oftentimes, just independent reading can lead to a loss of instructional time. As long as you're doing independent reading well and you have the classroom routines established, plus you're providing decent small group instruction to all of your students, I think you are maximizing your instructional time. But anytime you get over more than 20 to 30 minutes of silent reading, I think you're wasting time. But that's, again, a personal opinion. Others might disagree. And so you can do guided reading groups, and I will post this PowerPoint for everyone to see during your small group instruction. A lot of school districts use an approach called balanced literacy, which, while that's a generic term, it often refers to a specific commercial program that uses the Fontes and Pinnell approach to guided reading groups. But you can do any of your during conferences. You can set up your reading groups any way that you want, or usually the way that your boss tells you to. Uh-oh, hold on. So when I talked about setting those classroom routines, have anchor charts like this where you talk to students, and this is something they come up with in your mini lessons, where they talk about different ways to think about their readings. Like, think about the story while you're reading, picture the stories you're reading. So they're talking about their metacognition here, and that word metacognition means to think about your thinking. And what you see here is an anchor chart of strategies that good readers might use to think about their thinking. Here's another anchor chart of what fluent readers would do. And these are all conversations that you want to be having with your students, because you might, in your small group instruction, you might be doing some fluent reading instruction with one of the groups. Here's rules. Here's an example of rules for readers' workshops and what you need to do. Like with rule number 4, you'll see that often where teachers, when you're doing small group instruction, you don't want to do it. What's the big key? Well, like most teaching, it's classroom management. Are you, as a new teacher, able to have 4 students sitting at a table and then have another 22 students quietly and independently reading without having their books upside down and understanding what they are reading? So it is a challenge. The last step is the reading conferences, and this is where you connect students to their goals. and you want to develop a system to track the data, and you want to involve the students. If you're doing 90% of the talking, it's not a conference, it's a telling. So you really want to open up your conferences with the students. And I'm going to do another talk later in the week that goes through strategies for reading conferences. And I'll skip the video again. So Reader's Notebook, when we talked about setting these up, there's lots of ways to do that. You can go so much further beyond just doing a reading log where you have kids track the number of pages that they've read or the number of books. That doesn't really tell you anything. So my elements, what did I use? I would have a reading log where I did track that, but I would do more with it. I'd have set up maybe a genre study section. I'd have them track their own reading goals, and I would use it to have them write reading responses to their readings. All right, sorry about the delay here. I'm just trying to get the slide to advance. All right. And maybe that is it for our slides. Oh, and I guess that is it. That's why I won't go any further. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the Reader's Workshop. Thanks, everybody.